Welcome to the Scanning State Agency Records tutorial. This tutorial has three goals. 1. Consider the advantages and disadvantages of a scanning program. 2. Examine electronic records policies and procedures. And 3. Look at training materials on imaging and electronic records available from the State Archives of North Carolina. Throughout this tutorial, I will use the terms scanning and imaging interchangeably to describe the process of turning a paper record into a digital file. State agencies may scan any record. Before embarking on a project to image existing paper documents, it is important to consider the costs and benefits of such a project, as well as the technological infrastructure in particular that will be needed to support this work. As you are considering whether to begin a scanning program, it is important to weigh the costs and benefits of such a project. The documents themselves will have to be prepared. In the case of multi-page documents, all paperclips and staples will need to be removed. In the case of books or oversized documents, special scanning equipment will be needed. The scanning process itself will need to be incorporated into the workflow of your office. Factors to consider include: will each person be responsible for scanning documents received, or will a dedicated hire perform the scanning? Will scanning be done retroactively, and if so, who will be responsible for this work? Who will establish standards for resolution, file format, file naming, and metadata assignment? Who will oversee the quality control process that guarantees the usability of the scanned images? Finally, these scanned images will be digital files, which have preservation costs to consider related to their long-term storage. Nevertheless, many state agencies find imaging is worth these costs. For one thing, paper copies of any records that are not permanent may be destroyed after scanning, so long as the proper policies and procedures are in place. We'll get to that shortly. So for records that tend to be voluminous, such as personnel files and social services program files, there can be a cost savings by no longer needing to have the physical space on-site or off-site to store these files. Digital copies of records are also generally easier to access. So for items that need to be accessed frequently and by more than one person, digital images are useful. Here's another way of considering whether or not imaging is the right solution for your office. Some examples of records that are good candidates for scanning are: active records that you use for daily operations, records that were created in one office but are used by many. For example, construction files, which are used by your CEO, legal counsel, financial officer, architects, and contractors. Records that need to be accessed quickly, such as those useful for audits, legal cases, or important projects. Records that are frequently needed and may be difficult to search, such as board minutes, which are consulted frequently for precedent and are easier to search retrospectively when they are full-text searchable. But with this, keep in mind that it will be necessary to process your scanned images using optical character recognition in order for them to be searchable. On the other side of the equation, if there are documents that are rarely accessed, or if they have almost met their retention period, there is probably no point in scanning them. Also keep in mind that if your paper records have a permanent retention, you may need to keep them even if a digital copy is also created. According to DNCR's Human Readable Preservation Duplicates policy, there are certain records that are considered essential to agency operations that must be retained in their native paper format or converted to microfilm, even if they are also scanned and retained electronically for ease of access. Some of the characteristics that identify records that should be retained in a human readable format include those that affect multiple people without regard to relation, those that document governance, and those that document citizenship. Examples of these records include minutes of governing bodies, birth and death certificates, and court records. This Human Readable Duplicates policy can be accessed on our website. Consult your records management analyst for additional guidance. Once you decide to proceed with an imaging program, you must also plan for the sustainability of these digital files you will create. Never trust claims that you will not have to actively manage electronic records over time. Hardware and software are going to change. Because electronic records rely on technology to be accessible, they require active management if you plan on being able to read them more than 5 years from now. If you are considering vendors for your scanning program, you should confirm that you will have a way to get your records out of proprietary or vendor-based systems. Active management also means checking on these files periodically to make sure that they are still accessible, meaning that all of the technology required to read that file is still working properly, and that the media on which the files are stored is still readable. There also need to be clear responsibilities regarding the deletion of electronic records when their required retention has been met and their reference value has expired. The two examples of storage media on this slide are not good choices for the long-term storage of digital files. Floppy disks are problematic because most machines today no longer have drives to read these disks, and flash drives are relatively unstable and prone to errors, so they are better used for temporary storage. Network servers with off-site backups are a preferred medium for storage. By this point, you probably realize that an imaging program is not as simple as scanning a document and throwing away the paper. Just as with paper records, these digital files that you are creating may have legal or fiscal value, so it is important to be able to prove that you have kept the original bitstream, the original file generated from your scan in its original format, to be able to prove the record's authenticity. Two common measurements of the authenticity of a record, be it paper or electronic, are that it was created during the regular course of business according to established office procedures. It is also important to document who has access to create, modify, or delete electronic files. All of these policies and procedures should be internally documented. To help you address this need for policies, the Digital Services and Government Records sections of the State Archives have produced a sample electronic records and imaging policy that can be used as a template. You can use this model to capture your training documentation, backup procedures, internal workflows, and physical and intellectual security precautions. There is a set of 2 tutorials available on the State Archives site that walks you through each section of this sample policy. If your state agency decides that scanning is an appropriate use of your resources and you wish to destroy the paper copies of these records before their retention period has been met, you must take 2 steps before any destructions occur. Number 1, your agency or a subunit within the agency must have an approved electronic records policy in place. And 2, you must obtain authorization to destroy paper records that have been scanned. The form pictured here is available at the end of the sample electronic records policy. It needs to be approved by your supervisor and authorized by your agency's chief records officer. This form should be retained as part of your agency's records management materials. If your authorization to destroy paper records lists a specific date range, that suffices as documentation for the destruction. However, if you have an ongoing scanning project and do not include specific dates on that form, then the destructions of these paper records should be logged when they occur. The Government Records section provides a sample destructions log to aid agencies in keeping track of their destructions of public records. The names for the record series, along with the required retention periods, can be found in the functional schedule for North Carolina state agencies. The date and method of destruction should be indicated along with the name of the agency employee who authorized the destruction of the records. There are several other aids that have been developed by the State Archives. On the web page of Digital Records Policies and Guidelines, under the Digital Imaging tab, there is a series of guidelines for digital imaging systems. Should you decide to outsource some portion of your scanning work, there is a checklist on our website that identifies the issues that need to be documented in the contract in order to guarantee the trustworthiness and long-term preservation of your records. Another useful document discusses the guidelines for choosing file formats when retaining electronic records for long periods of time. This is available under the Information Governance tab. And Best Practices for File Naming provides an overview of file naming practices that can ensure that your files are easily discoverable. Each of these rules is explained in the document listed. If you have any questions about your state agency imaging program, please feel free to contact your records management analyst at the State Archives of North Carolina.